May 27, 1940, 1100 hours, Washington, D.C. The sun filtered through thick curtains in a nondescript government building on Constitution Avenue, casting narrow bars of light across tables piled with mechanical fragments, codebooks, and reams of intercepted telegraph paper. The air smelled of machine oil and burnt coffee. In a room guarded by men with sidearms and clearances higher than most generals possessed, a team of American cryptanalysts sat hunched over a device that resembled a typewriter married to a telephone switchboard. They called it Purple. The Japanese called it Unbreakable. For 18 months, the Empire of Japan had transmitted its most sensitive diplomatic communications through this cipher machine, confident that no foreign power could penetrate its labyrinthine mechanical logic. Purple employed stepping switches borrowed from telephone technology, creating encryption patterns so complex that Japanese officials believed it would take a century of human calculation to decode a single message.
If you're enjoying this video, let us know where you're watching from. Comment your location below.
They were wrong. On this warm May morning, as cherry blossoms fell across Tokyo and Japanese diplomats cabled instructions to their embassy in Berlin, American cryptanalysts read every word in real time. The breakthrough had come not from espionage or theft, but from mathematical genius and relentless pattern analysis. Frank Rowlett, a Kentucky-born mathematician who earned $4,200 annually, led a team that reconstructed Purple's internal mechanisms without ever seeing the actual machine. They built an analog from scratch, using telephone switches purchased from hardware suppliers, guided only by statistical analysis of intercepted messages. When the replica finally decoded a Japanese diplomatic cable perfectly, matching the plain text word for word, the room fell silent. Then someone whispered what they all understood. They had just altered the course of history. Admiral Yamamoto would not learn this truth for years, but on December 7, 1941, when Japanese carrier aircraft descended on Pearl Harbor, American intelligence had already read the diplomatic traffic indicating that negotiations had failed. They knew war was imminent, though not the precise target or timing. And in the months and years that followed, as Japanese naval commanders issued coded orders and diplomatic channels buzzed with encrypted strategy, American cryptanalysts sat in their guarded rooms and read everything. The Japanese Imperial Navy prided itself on operational security. Yamamoto himself had helped develop the Navy's communication protocols, insisting on cipher complexity that would resist any conceivable attack. Purple represented the apex of this philosophy, a machine so sophisticated that its operators required weeks of training just to encode messages correctly. Each machine cost a fortune to manufacture, and only the most secure diplomatic posts received them. To Japanese minds, the cipher represented technological supremacy, the marriage of traditional discipline with modern engineering. This confidence shaped every strategic decision. When Yamamoto planned the Pearl Harbor attack, he communicated preliminary concepts through Purple encrypted diplomatic channels, coordinating with the Foreign Ministry while naval operations used separate codes. When Japanese diplomats in Washington negotiated with Secretary of State Cordell Hull throughout 1941, they transmitted detailed negotiating positions through Purple, never imagining that Hull had read their instructions before they entered his office. When Ambassador Kichisaburo Nomura received orders to present Japan's final note terminating negotiations, timed to be delivered 30 minutes before the Pearl Harbor attack, American intelligence decoded it hours in advance. The Americans called their intelligence harvest magic, and they guarded it with obsessive secrecy. President Franklin Roosevelt received daily folders of decrypted intercepts delivered by courier in locked pouches. Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who once declared that gentlemen do not read each other's mail, overcame his scruples when shown what Purple revealed. General Marshall restricted magic distribution to fewer than a dozen individuals, fearing that any leak would alert Japan to the compromise and prompt a cipher change that would blind American intelligence. But Yamamoto, brilliant strategist though he was, remained convinced that Japan's communications remained secure. He had studied at Harvard, served as a naval attaché in Washington, and walked American streets. He knew American industrial capacity, had warned his government that war with the United States would end in disaster. Yet even his sophisticated understanding of American capabilities did not extend to imagining that mathematicians in a Washington office building had reconstructed Purple's mechanical soul without stealing a single blueprint. The war's first year reinforced Japanese confidence. Pearl Harbor had crippled the American Pacific Fleet. Japanese forces swept through Southeast Asia, capturing Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and the Philippines. Every victory seemed to confirm that superior Japanese spirit and tactical excellence would overcome American material advantages. And throughout these campaigns, Japanese commanders continued transmitting orders through encrypted channels, never suspecting that their enemy heard every word.
The first crack in this illusion came at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942. American carriers, guided by intercepted intelligence, positioned themselves to intercept a Japanese invasion force heading toward Port Moresby. For the first time, carrier aircraft engaged each other without the surface ships ever coming within sight. The battle ended inconclusively, but the Japanese invasion turned back, a strategic defeat masked as a tactical draw. Japanese commanders noted that American forces seemed unusually well positioned, almost as if they had known the invasion plan in advance. But they attributed this to reconnaissance, not to the impossible notion that their codes had been broken. Then came Midway. On May 20, 1942, Japanese naval intelligence transmitted an encrypted message outlining Admiral Yamamoto's plan to seize Midway Island, using the invasion to lure the American carriers into a decisive battle. The message detailed task force compositions, approach routes, and timing. In Hawaii, Admiral Chester Nimitz read the decrypted message and faced a profound dilemma. The intelligence told him exactly where and when to position his carriers for an ambush, but acting on it risked revealing that American cryptanalysts could read Japanese naval codes. If Japan realized their ciphers were compromised, they would change them immediately, and the intelligence advantage would vanish. Nimitz made a calculated gamble. He ordered carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown to positions northeast of Midway, where they could ambush the Japanese fleet. But to maintain the deception, he instructed Midway's garrison to send frequent reconnaissance flights, creating the impression that American positioning resulted from air searches rather than signals intelligence. He also ordered Midway to transmit a message in an old, easily broken code, reporting that the island's water distillation plant had failed. When Japanese intelligence intercepted this message and then transmitted their own encrypted report that AF is short of water, using their designation for Midway, American cryptanalysts confirmed they had correctly identified the target. The battle unfolded on June 4, 1942, with American dive bombers catching 3 Japanese carriers refueling aircraft on their flight decks. Within 5 minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were burning wrecks. Hiryu launched a counterattack that damaged Yorktown before succumbing to American bombers herself. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of irreplaceable pilots, and the strategic initiative in the Pacific. Yamamoto withdrew, the invasion canceled, the decisive victory he sought transformed into catastrophic defeat. In Tokyo, naval staff officers analyzed the disaster, trying to understand how American forces had achieved such perfect positioning. Some suspected a code compromise, but investigations found no evidence of espionage or theft. The cipher machines remained secure in their locked rooms, operated by trusted personnel. The mathematical complexity of the codes seemed to preclude cryptanalytic breakthrough. Eventually, the official conclusion blamed inadequate reconnaissance and unfortunate timing. The possibility that American mathematicians had achieved the impossible, breaking codes without access to the machines themselves, remained too far-fetched to seriously consider. Yamamoto knew better. He never voiced his suspicions publicly, never committed them to paper, but those close to him noticed a change after Midway. The admiral, who had once moved chess pieces with confident precision, now hesitated, questioned, recalculated. He began varying communication patterns, using different codes for different messages, limiting radio transmissions during operational planning. But he remained trapped by institutional momentum.
The Imperial Navy possessed thousands of cipher machines distributed across the Pacific. Changing the entire system required resources Japan could not spare and would signal weakness to subordinates. So the encrypted messages continued flowing, and American cryptanalysts continued reading them. By early 1943, the intelligence advantage had become systematic. American submarines guided by decrypted shipping routes devastated Japanese merchant convoys. The empire depended on resource imports from Southeast Asia, oil from the Dutch Indies, rubber from Malaya, rice from Indochina, and these supplies traveled by sea in slow-moving cargo vessels. Every major convoy route, every tanker departure, every transport schedule passed through encrypted communications that American intelligence intercepted and decoded. Japanese merchant losses climbed from 58 ships in January 1943 to over 100 by June. The Imperial Navy blamed American submarine wolf packs and improved sonar technology, never realizing that submarines were being directed to specific coordinates based on reading the enemy's mail. General Douglas MacArthur's island-hopping campaign across the Southwest Pacific depended heavily on signals intelligence. Before each invasion, American cryptanalysts provided detailed information on Japanese troop strength, defensive positions, and reinforcement schedules. When MacArthur's forces landed at locations Japanese commanders considered unlikely, catching defenders unprepared, the pattern repeated too often to be coincidence. Yet Japanese officers attributed these surprises to American aggressive risk-taking rather than intelligence penetration.
The symbolism was inescapable. America had turned Japan's technological pride into its greatest vulnerability. Every cipher machine, every encrypted transmission, every confidential order became an open book to the enemy. The very complexity that made Japanese officers confident in their security created the patterns that mathematical analysis exploited. And the institutional rigidity that prevented rapid cipher changes, the insistence on hierarchical approval, the inability to imagine that crude American pragmatism could defeat sophisticated Japanese engineering ensured the vulnerability persisted. April 18, 1943, 0600 hours. Rabaul, Solomon Islands. Admiral Yamamoto prepared for an inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands chain. The visit aimed to boost morale among garrison troops after months of grinding attrition against American forces. His staff prepared a detailed itinerary including departure times, flight routes, and arrival schedules at each base. Because the tour involved multiple Japanese-held islands and required coordination with garrison commanders, the itinerary was encrypted and transmitted through naval communication channels. In Pearl Harbor, cryptanalysts decoded the message within hours. It revealed that Yamamoto would fly from Rabaul to Balalil Island on April 18th, departing at 0600 hours in a G-4M bomber escorted by 6 Zero fighters. The intercept included precise timing, route information, and even noted that Yamamoto's punctuality was legendary. He would arrive exactly on schedule. Admiral Nimitz faced another decision that weighed operational advantage against security risk. Assassinating Yamamoto would eliminate Japan's most brilliant naval strategist, but doing so with such precision would almost certainly alert Japanese intelligence to a code compromise. Nimitz consulted with Washington. Secretary of the Navy Frank Mox supported the mission. President Roosevelt authorized it personally. The strategic value of removing Yamamoto outweighed the risk that Japan might finally change their ciphers. On April 18th, 18 P-38 Lightning fighters from the 396th Fighter Squadron took off from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, flying a circuitous low-altitude route designed to avoid Japanese radar and arrive at Balalil precisely at 9:35 hours, the moment Yamamoto's aircraft would be approaching the island. The pilots flew for over 400 miles, navigating by compass and dead reckoning, maintaining radio silence. At 9:34 hours, they spotted 2 G-4M bombers and 6 Zero escorts exactly where the intelligence predicted. The ambush lasted less than 3 minutes. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber shot down both bombers. Yamamoto's aircraft crashed into the jungle. Recovery teams found the admiral's body still strapped into his seat, killed by gunfire, his hand gripping his samurai sword. His watch had stopped at 9:45 hours.
10 minutes after scheduled arrival, delayed by American bullets. The Japanese Navy announced Yamamoto's death 5 weeks later, attributing it to combat operations without acknowledging the targeted assassination. But within the Navy's intelligence circles, the incident sparked renewed debate about communications security. The precision of the attack, American fighters arriving at an exact time and location to intercept an aircraft whose route was known only through encrypted orders, defied explanation through routine reconnaissance. Some officers insisted on immediate cipher changes. Others argued that replacing the entire system would cost months and resources Japan could not afford. The debate continued while American cryptanalysts kept reading. By late 1943, they were reading not just diplomatic and naval communications, but also Japanese army traffic, which used different cipher systems. The intelligence harvest revealed planned defensive positions, supply shortages, troop morale problems, and strategic debates among Japanese leadership. American commanders prosecuted the Pacific War with an intelligence advantage unprecedented in military history, reading the enemy's plans before they were executed. But Yamamoto never learned the full truth. He died believing that American tactical skill and perhaps inspired guesswork had led to the Midway ambush. He never knew that the mathematicians in Washington had been reading his encrypted messages since before Pearl Harbor. He never understood that the technological sophistication Japan prided itself on had been systematically defeated by American ingenuity, persistence, and mathematical brilliance. The cipher machine that was supposed to be unbreakable had been broken before Japan even entered the war. The full extent of American cryptanalysis remained classified for decades after the war's end. When historians finally gained access to the intercepts in the 1970s, they discovered that signals intelligence had nearly influenced every major American decision in the Pacific theater. The victory at Midway, the submarine campaign against Japanese commerce, the targeting of specific supply convoys, the island-hopping strategy, the assassination of Yamamoto, all depended on reading Japanese encrypted communications. Japanese officials who learned of the decryption after the war expressed disbelief. The mathematical complexity of Purple and the naval codes seemed to preclude cryptolytic breakthrough without physical access to the machines. That American mathematicians had reconstructed the cipher mechanisms through pure analysis, without espionage, without stolen documents, seemed almost supernatural. Yet the decrypted messages in American archives provided undeniable proof. Every order Yamamoto transmitted, every diplomatic instruction, every strategic debate, all had been read in real time by the enemy.
The breaking of Purple represented more than tactical advantage. It symbolized a fundamental difference in how Japan and America approached problem solving. Japan relied on elaborate engineering and assumed that complexity ensured security. America applied mathematical analysis and refused to accept that any code was truly unbreakable. Japan maintained rigid institutional processes that prevented rapid adaptation. America created small, empowered teams that could innovate without bureaucratic obstruction. Japan trusted in the superiority of spirit and tradition. America trusted in data, testing, and relentless iteration. Frank Rowlett, the mathematician who led the Purple Project, received a $1,000 bonus after the breakthrough, about 2 months of his annual salary. He continued working in signals intelligence throughout the war, training new cryptanalysts and attacking increasingly complex codes. After victory, he returned to relative obscurity, his contributions classified for decades. He never sought publicity, never claimed credit beyond what official histories eventually acknowledged. He had done what needed to be done because it was possible, because the mathematics suggested it could work, because American pragmatism preferred trying the impossible to accepting limitations. The cipher machines themselves became relics. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces collected Purple machines and naval code equipment, shipping them to Washington for study. Some were displayed in classified museums accessible only to intelligence personnel. Others were disassembled, their mechanisms analyzed to understand how Japanese engineers had designed such complex encryption systems. The irony was not lost on the cryptanalysts who examined them. These machines, meant to protect secrets, had become the means by which every secret was revealed. Historians often ask what might have happened if Japan had changed their ciphers after Midway, or after Yamamoto's death, or at any point when the circumstantial evidence suggested a security compromise. The consensus is that such a change would have significantly prolonged the Pacific War. American submarines would have needed months to redevelop targeting intelligence for merchant shipping. MacArthur's campaigns would have required more reconnaissance, more casualties, more time. The atomic bombs might still have ended the conflict, but the path to that ending would have been longer and bloodier. But Japan never made that change. Institutional inertia, bureaucratic resistance, and an inability to imagine that American capabilities exceeded Japanese assumptions ensured that the compromised ciphers remained in use until the war's end. Even when evidence mounted, when tactical surprises became too frequent to ignore, when the mathematics of coincidence strained credibility, Japanese leadership chose to believe in reconnaissance and luck rather than confront the more disturbing possibility that their most sophisticated technology had been systematically defeated. Yamamoto took that failure to his grave in the jungle of Bougainville. His body was recovered and cremated with full military honors. His ashes were divided, half interred at Tokyo's Tama Cemetery, half returned to his family temple. The sword he carried on his final flight was presented to his widow. The watch that stopped at 0945 hours was preserved as a memorial. But the encrypted message that directed American fighters to his exact location, the decrypted intelligence that turned his punctuality into a death sentence, the mathematical triumph that gave America an all-seeing eye across the Pacific, these remained secret for 30 years. In the end, what Yamamoto said when he learned Americans broke purple completely was nothing, because he never learned it at all. The revelation he feared, the security nightmare he sometimes suspected but could not prove, the technological defeat that would have shattered his confidence in Japanese communications, none of this reached him while he lived. He died believing that American skill and fortune had defeated his Midway plan, not realizing that American mathematicians had read his orders before his own subordinates executed them. The truth was worse than anything he imagined. The Americans had not just broken one code or intercepted one message, they had systematically penetrated Japan's entire communication infrastructure, reading every cipher, tracking every transmission, exploiting every pattern. They had turned Japan's most protected secrets into open intelligence, transforming the very act of encryption into a liability. And they had done it not through espionage or theft, but through mathematical brilliance and engineering persistence, the unglamorous, unsexy work of analysis and iteration that Americans excelled at while others trusted in complexity and tradition. Purple was supposed to be unbreakable. That was what Japanese officials believed when they deployed it, what diplomats assumed when they transmitted through it, what Yamamoto trusted when he encoded his strategic communications. Unbreakable. The word itself carried the weight of absolute security, the promise that Japanese secrets would remain Japanese.
But there is no unbreakable. There is only unbroken until someone breaks it, and in a Washington office building where men earned modest salaries and worked without glory, American mathematicians had broken what was supposed to be impossible. They did it with telephone switches and patience, with statistical analysis and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They did it because American pragmatism does not recognize theoretical impossibility, only problems not yet solved. That was the lesson Yamamoto never learned, the truth that died with him in the jungle. In war, as in cryptography, superiority belongs not to those who build the most complex defenses, but to those who refuse to stop attacking them. Japan built ciphers. America broke them. And in that difference lay the outcome of the Pacific War, decided not by aircraft carriers and battleships, but by mathematicians with pencils and determination. The sun set over Washington on May 27, 1940, the same day it rose over Tokyo. In between, across telephone cables and radio waves, through encrypted pulses and decoded plaintext, the shadow war of ciphers tilted toward America. Purple was broken. Japan did not know, and for 5 years, that ignorance would cost them everything.